Please welcome our moderator, Pulitzer Prize-winning author of King, A Life, Jonathan Eig. And our distinguished panelists, Michael Siegel and Karen Freeman Wilson.
Well, thank you so much to my distinguished guests. It's an honor to be here today and look at this beautiful room. We're here today on Martin Luther King's 97th birthday. And while we just saw this remarkable speech, the one we all know so well, it's worth remembering that 5 years later, shortly before his assassination, he published his last book, which was called Where Do We Go From Here? The subtitle was Chaos or Community. And that question feels very much still hanging in the balance. And that's what I want to talk to our distinguished guests about today. And I'd like to start with a question for both of you. Why does it matter that we're here today? To you personally, what brought you to the moment that we are all sharing now? What made you care about this particular issue? The black community, the Jewish community have a lot on their plate. Why does it matter about this intersection to you personally? And I'll start with Karen and we'll go to Michael.
So first and foremost, I want to thank Pastor and Rosie for convening us, but more importantly, for positioning this as a part of a continuing conversation. And that's really what brought me here. You know, all of us have been to one-off conversations, one-off gatherings that begin and start at the event. As a kid, I was in a lot of adult spaces. And so I became a student of civil rights. Goodman, Schwerner, Chaney, I understood at 7, 8 years old really what had happened and why it had happened. And that really framed my work because I understood that just like they were murdered together, that our fates are intertwined. But as time has progressed, we see different efforts, intentional and sometimes accidental, that have divided us, meaning blacks and Jews. And given that effort to divide us, and what I will say is that that's not an accident because people understand that if we ever get together, how powerful we could really be. And so as we come to present day and see all of the challenges that our city faces, our country faces, I understand that despite conflict that may exist between us as global communities or even with some individuals, the only way that we will see the lasting change, particularly in our community and also in our country, is by joining together and becoming allies. But we have to decide if we're going to use a Band-Aid or whether we're going to perform the surgery that's really, really needed.
I'm going to come back to you and ask you what that surgery might look like. But first, Michael.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here, and I think it's very appropriate that we are gathering on Dr. King's birthday. And I want to go back in time with you to January 14th, 1963. On that day, here in the city of Chicago, there was the National Conference of Religion and Race. This was a bold and risky conference to create in 1963. This was the day that Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel and Dr. Martin Luther King actually met They met that day. And Heschel stood up on that day, and I'm going to read the beginning of his speech to you. At the first conference on religion and race, the main participants were Pharaoh and Moses. Moses' words were, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may celebrate a feast to me." While Pharaoh retorted, "Who is the Lord that I should heed his voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and moreover, I will not let Israel go." Heschel continued, "The outcome of that summit meeting has not come to an end. Pharaoh is not ready to capitulate. The Exodus began, but is far from having been completed. In fact, it was easier for the children of Israel to cross the Red Sea than a black person to cross certain university campuses. Let us dodge no issues. Let us yield no inch to bigotry. Let us make no compromise with callousness. In the words of William Lloyd Garrison, I will be as harsh as truth and as uncompromising as justice. On this subject, slavery, I do not wish to think, to speak, or to write with moderation. I am in earnest. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will not retreat a single word, and I will be heard. Dr. King heard those words, and this holy bond, this remarkable friendship began. And I want to say to you, actually, I want to ask you a question. These two men took remarkable risks. They stood together. They had the hard conversations. Are we good stewards of their legacy? I can tell you as a rabbi who has been in Chicago for more than 40 years now, that I have gone to more than my share of Dr. Martin Luther King gatherings. I have listened to heartfelt speeches quoting Dr. King, quoting Abraham Heschel. And then, at the very end, this would disband, and I wouldn't see the black participants again until next year. Are we good shepherds of their legacy? If we're going to be good shepherds, then I'm going to quote my brother from another mother, Rabbi Chris Harris. He's one of the rabbis in Anshe Emet. Since we're passing out ordinations here, I might as well. We need to put new pictures in old frames. That is why we are gathered to hear. We are gathered to have hard conversations. We are gathered to hear important truths. We are also gathered to stand humbly before one another and say, I cannot possibly know your pain, but I can hear your voice and try to understand. That's what the Unity Forum stands for. The test for this day, because the debate between Moses and Pharaoh is most definitely continuing to 2026. The question is, where will we be next year on Dr. King's birthday? Will we have truly created a body of unity? Will we truly be better in understanding one another? Or will we simply continue this process of rinse and repeat? That's the challenge of this day. But everybody came today for the same reason that I came. Because this is not simply a good idea, it is vital for the United States of America in 2026.
Thank you. And let's get into that. Let's get into that. When we came together once as people in the 60s, it was because there was action required of us. There were marches that demanded bodies. There were jail cells that needed to be filled. We came together in protest. And that was the moment that we still celebrate now, 60 years later, this great coalition. How do we do that today? Is there nothing to be protested today? How do we put our gathering today into action? I'll start with you, Karen.
So when we think about that history, it was hard to ignore. You were talking about lynchings. You were talking about other forms of death and murder. You were on the heels of Emmett Till's murder. You were talking about sheer brutality that was not only apparent to the people who were participating, but it was apparent to everyone in the nation, and everyone was horrified. I don't know that you have that universal horror right now. Quite frankly, some people have become tolerant in a very uncomfortable way. And I think Rosie referenced it when he said that he felt alone. Rosie's not the only one that feels like he's by himself. Jewish people aren't the only ones who feel like they're by themselves. Black folks not only feel alone and exhausted, but there is this sense that we have the backs, those of us who have been privileged, like many of us in this room, have the backs, have the individuals who have not been privileged on our backs. And if we are carrying them, it is hard to be united with other people who are not them. Even when we understand the importance of that allyship and unity, we get it. We know how important it is. We know how horrific October 7th or October 8th, 9th, 10th, and beyond has been. But even before that horror, and I would say in the midst of that, people were anticipating what would happen because of Project 2025. And I'm not saying that that we can't walk and chew gum. We all can, we all do. But there is so much pain that lives behind the courageous conversations that we're talking about we need to have, that we have to make room for that to really get to not just the conversation, but the problem solving that is required in having those conversations.
Just to build on that, I can list all of the things that the Jewish community needs from the black community today. And I'm quite sure that the black participants can give a list of things they need the Jewish community to support. That is transactional thinking, which has overtaken our country. What the Unity Forum is about is the most necessary aspect, relationship. I need to know your name. You need to know my name. You need to know my story. I need to know your story. And so those conversations lead to a deeper relationship, but there is one more piece here that we should not forget, and Heschel and King understood that, and that is that there are ideas that are bigger than we are. There are ideas that we are obligated to stand for. The United States of America was founded, it's the only country that was founded on ideas. And that first idea is that all human beings are created equal. This country will rise and fall on that idea. Jews in this country are actually not seen as equal. Because if we were, then people would actually care that the oldest synagogue in Mississippi was burned on this past Shabbat. And it wouldn't be a 45-second clip on the news. If this was true and we were practicing that, the poverty, the inequality that exists in Chicago, the second most segregated city in the United States, wouldn't exist. This Unity Forum is all about seeing each other as beings created in the image of God, building that relationship, and once that's done, then we can talk about what we're going to ask of each other as we go forward. Achdut in Hebrew means unity. It's based upon the root word echad, one. We need to be one, and we can only be one if we know each other's name and we know each other's story. And then we can begin to at least appreciate the pain of the other, as well as their joys and their hopes.
I have one more question for each of you. I'd like both of you to answer this question. In Chaos, or in King's book, Where Do We Go From Here, he talked about the moment requiring an audacious kind of faith. And that audacious kind of faith had to fuel our action. So we are talking today about listening to each other better. We are talking today about breaking down divisions and crossing lines and getting to know each other better. Where does that audacious faith lead us in action? What are the steps that you'd like to see concretely emerge from this gathering today, not just in the weeks ahead, but in the years ahead? How do we take concrete action to work together in living out that audacious faith? I'll let you go first, Rabbi, and Karen finish this.
Every person here has a chance to be audacious. The next time you are in a room or you mention that you went to the Unity Forum and a Jewish person says to you, "Why are you bothering with the black community? They turned their back on us." You need to have an answer for them. A powerful, audacious, meaningful answer. And the next time a black person is asked, "Why did you bother going to the Unity Forum?" All the Jews, they just care about themselves, don't they? You need to have an answer. And you need to inspire that person in thoughtful, meaningful, audacious ways. It's when we get to that point that we can actually dream together and see the world as not as it is, but as it could be. That's how we become the stewards of King and Heschel, creating new pictures for old frames.
So, Rabbi Michael talked about the importance of relationship. What do you see? Because relationship comes out of knowing a person, right? Because I may see one thing when I look at Pete, but I can tell you 5 things about him because I know him. I've had a conversation with him. I know Pastor Chris. I call him PC. And the point of that is that we have to create more opportunities to see each other, to know, to understand. And it can't be a room like this because it's so big, right? But it's hard because we all have, our set things that we do on a given day. So how do we build that into what we do? Well, our rooms have to look different. If I have an Urban League event, it can't just be the usual suspects in the room.
That's right. That's right.
If there is something that's sponsored by ADL or JUF, it can't just be the usual people in the room. We have to develop those opportunities, not just to work together on agenda items, but we also have to use those social opportunities, those casual opportunities to get to know each other, because then if there is an agenda item that comes up where I need a fight, I know if I'm going to start a fight, I'm calling Pastor Chris.
I'm right there with you, baby.
Because I know him, I've worked with him. I know that if I'm going to start a fight, I'm going to call Maggie Shapak because I've worked with her in police community relations. And so that's the type of opportunities that I'd like to see come out of this forum. Because, again, Band-Aid, surgery. You can just slap a Band-Aid on, and it might stop bleeding for a minute if it's superficial. But we understand that this is not superficial. We have to go deep. And going deep requires intentional planning. They didn't just have this luncheon. They had a run-up to the luncheon of 7 dinners. That's the type of work that has to be done. And so I've got to think about, what am I going to do to improve this? And not just me, but everyone in this room has to think that way.
If I could just add one thought, and that is that when Pastor Harris and I began this work more than a decade ago, I would not have imagined that this was possible. That this room filled with leaders, people who each of you makes a difference in significant ways in our society, would gather in this way, in this spirit. Dreams can come true. Look, I'm sitting in Michael Sachs' seat. But you have to work to make them happen. Dreams are not fulfilled on their own. We're part of that, and that's our responsibility, to take the work that Lee Rosenberg and Pastor Chris Harris put in, along with the many others, to create this Unity Forum and make this a dream fulfilled. That's our task.
Thank you.